Hello, welcome everyone to the MCCPTA Special Education Committee Quarterly Speaker Series. We're very excited to have Monica Martinez here with us today. She's going to be speaking on the fundamentals of the special education process. And I know that's a really important topic. I know that a lot of parents have questions about how does this all work and how can I make, things be made more effective? How can I be a more effective advocate? And I'm very happy that Monica's here with us on a personal level, because Monica and I, we know each other. Our boys know each other, and she's a friend of mine. And we also are professionally in the special education advocacy world together. So I'm very excited that she's here, and I know she's going to give a great talk tonight. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here. I just wanted to start out by just saying who I am, and if Rachel Tate, if she pop on, Rachel, if you I'll put your camera on. She said she might be a little late. I'm the chair of the MCCPTA Special Education Committee, and Rachel Tate, she's our co-chair, and we have a lot of things planned this year, and we're very excited to be helping. We want to help you. We want to help advocate for all families with students with disabilities and MCPS. There's a lot to be done, and we're just trying to work on initiatives, and we're doing some recruitment right now. We're trying to get a special education representative in every school. So if that's something you're interested in, we would love to have you volunteer. We don't have nearly enough special ed reps that we would like to have one in every school. So I'll put some information in the chat a little later. And what else? Also looking for some admin help. If anyone is good at that and would like to help out with that, we love some volunteers for that kind of thing too. And I'm just going to introduce Monica now. And also I just want to let you know that we also just have our next speaker, which is going to be, we just found that word, that Brian Gruber and Kimberly Glassman, who are special education attorneys, and they're going to be speaking on Thursday, January 13th at 8 p.m. So mark your calendar. I'll put that in the chat later too. But we're very excited to have them. So one of our goals for this year is to work on knowing your rights. So the more you know your rights, the more a better advocate you can be. So that's why we're happy to have Monica here tonight. And then we're going to have the attorneys come next time. So thanks, Monica. I'm just going to do a little intro about Monica, and then she can get started. So if everyone could just please make sure that your camera is off and you're muted. And if you have any questions about anything about what Monica's saying, or just in general about the Special Education Committee, feel free to just type that in the chat, and we'll go through questions at the end. So Monica came to educational advocacy through her direct experience of advocating for appropriate special education services for her autistic son. Through her 7+ years of involvement in partnership for Extraordinary Minds, X-Minds, a Montgomery County-based autism advocacy nonprofit, Monica developed an in-depth understanding of how Montgomery County Public Schools educate students on the autism spectrum and how to navigate the district's special education system. Monica works to help parents and guardians understand the educational rights of their children. In addition to having directed the work of X-Minds for several years, Monica attended Rights Law, Special Education Law and Advocacy training, and completed the year-long Special Education Advocate Training 2.0 through the Council of Parent Advocates, Council of Parents, I should know this, I went through the course. Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, GOPA, which is a fantastic organization. So again, welcome, Monica, and we're very excited to have you.
Thanks. I know that's a real mouthful. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for inviting me to speak tonight. I really appreciate that. And as Stephanie said, I came to advocacy kind of unplanned and unintentionally, but my son, I have twins actually. One of them has autism, was autistic, and I learned a lot about how to advocate for him all on my own, and then with Partnership for Extraordinary Minds. And having learned all of that great information about how to navigate through the special ed system, I said, hey, I really should not keep all this information to myself. I bet you there are a lot of parents who could really benefit from all of the stuff that I've learned. And so that's how I came to be a special ed advocate. I'm currently working with Susie Blattner and her practice. She's been a great mentor, and so I will give you some of the basics. So as is suggested by the title, Fundamentals of Special Education Process, this is, you know, a basic overview of special ed in MCPS. So if are questions that you have, would like some deeper probing in, please feel free to email me or put it in the chat and we can talk about some of those things offline. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, but I've already messed it up. So there we go. And now you can see this. All right. And did it not work? It did not work. Oh, wait, hold on. Obviously, I do not have a technology degree, but I do think I've managed. All right, so Stephanie, that looks good. All right, so what are we going to learn today? By the end of this presentation, I hope you will be able to understand the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan. Lots of parents have questions about that. I will also walk you through the different parts of the IEP, how you can monitor progress on the IEP goals. What is the annual review and how should you prepare for it? What's the triennial reevaluation? And maybe you have heard of the triennial. We'll discuss what that is. And then at the end, I'll hopefully be able to answer some of your specific questions about the special education process. And like they say at the Special Ed Advocacy Committee, that's the SEAC that meets every third Thursday of the month. I probably won't get too specific about your child's specific school and issues, but if we can keep the questions general, I'll be happy to provide all of the detail I can. So first, what's an IEP and what's a 504 plan? So the Individualized Education Program, or an IEP, is governed by the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Improvement Act of 2004. Short, we call it IDEA. So that is considered to be an education law. It talks about how students with disabilities should be educated. The big catchphrase for IEPs is FAPE. That means children with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate public education. And appropriate was recently one of the issues examined in a Supreme Court ruling called Andrew F. And appropriate means in light of that student's circumstances. So all students are supposed to make meaningful progress in light of their disability, in light of their specific circumstances, in order to receive free and appropriate public education. Eligibility for an IEP is determined by specific requirements as spelled out by IDEA. There are 13 different disability categories under which your child may qualify for an IEP, and the disability has to adversely affect their educational performance. By contrast, a Section 504 plan is governed by Section 504, as the name suggests, of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is a civil rights law. So this law says that children cannot be excluded from participating in or denied the benefits of any public program that's receiving federal assistance. So this law affords children equal access to education. So a child with a 504 plan may need accommodations or modifications, but does not meet the eligibility requirements for special education services as they are spelled out under the IDEA. However, in both cases, the eligibility process starts out the same way. The step one, and maybe some of you have already been through this, and if not, if you're just about to embark upon this journey, this is a great sort of step-by-step plan to get you where you need to be. So the first step is somebody makes a referral for a screening. That could be a parent writing to their student's principal saying, hey, I think my child has a disability. I would like you to screen them to determine whether they qualify for special education services. Or a teacher can note that their kids are a certain child is having a problem in their classroom and then make that same written referral to the principal of the school. So once that referral is made, then a screening meeting is held to determine whether a child should be or should not be assessed. So the law is written broadly so that all areas of a suspected disability should be assessed by the school. And it's better to err on the side of over-assessing rather than under-assessing. So anytime a child is suspected of having a disability, the onus is on the school district to assess whether that is in fact the case. So after those assessments are completed, there'll be an initial evaluation meeting, which will happen 60 days after parents or guardians have consented to testing. So when you go to this screening meeting, they say, yes, we think your child should be assessed for a disability, then parents and guardians are required to give their consent for the school district to assess them. Then 60 days later, you will meet with the evaluation team to review the results of those assessments. If it is determined at that meeting that yes, your child does have a disability that's under one of these 13 different categories, and that disability is negatively or adversely impacting their educational progress, then they will be determined to be eligible for special education. And then that IEP, which is basically a contract between the family and the school district, spelling out which services are going to be provided in order to provide that child with a free appropriate public education. So that IEP must be developed within 30 days after the student's found eligible for special education services. And at the initial IEP, once the IEP is developed, the parents are required to give their written consent before the school can initiate that IEP. That's one of the few times when you'll have to sign off on an IEP. There are some other circumstances, but every year when you go through the annual review, you do not have to re-consent to that IEP being put into place. All right, this is really important for parents and guardians to understand. And what is important is that you know you are an equal member of the IEP team. Other members of the IEP team would, of course, include at least one general education teacher, one special education teacher, a school administrator, like a principal or an assistant principal, someone who can interpret test results, that's often the school psychologist, and then when appropriate, as in when your child reaches the age of 14, the student, him or herself, should be involved in the IEP meeting. But it's really important that parents and guardians understand that they are just as important to the IEP team as any of the other members. And that's why we're having this meeting tonight, so that you can know what your rights are and how to participate effectively in those meetings. So what are the parts of the IEP? I know it's really a little dry, but I'll try to make it entertaining. Just an overview: student information, the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. I like to call them the PLOPs, but you can call them present levels, which seem kind of boring, but it's actually where it drives the rest of the IEP. The special considerations and accommodations, extended school year. So does your child, do they have emerging skills or critical life skills that will require them to be in school over the summer? That's what extended school year is about. Transition section of the IEP starts when your child is 14 years old. And that's where you and the IEP team talk about how you're going to prepare your child for life after high school, whether they're going on to higher education or onto work or some sort of day programming. That's something that you want to start thinking about at least as early as age 14, if not earlier. Goals, that's what most parents and guardians fix their ideas on and get really concerned about. What are the goals? What are we expecting our child to achieve during the next school year? Services, how are they going to achieve these goals in the next school year? Could be speech as a service, it's a related service, occupational therapy, but also just special education itself is considered a service. And where are they going to receive this special education? Is it going to be in the general ed setting, or is it going to be in a special ed setting? And we'll talk about that as we get further into the slides. And then LRE, this is a term you might hear at the end of the meeting, and it's a really important term to understand: least restrictive environment. The IDEA requires school districts to educate students in the least restrictive environment. And least restrictive means an environment that has the least amount of modifications made to it. So a regular general ed setting for a student that doesn't have a disability would be considered the least restrictive environment. So you'll hear a lot maybe about the homeschool model. The homeschool model, which is just MCPS's way of saying your neighborhood school, is considered to be the least restrictive environment. And as your child has more and more needs that can't be supported in that neighborhood school, or they need special modifications to receive their education in that neighborhood school, the environment is considered to become more restrictive. And I'll show you some examples as we get further into the slides. But your IEP team will always be looking to provide special education to your student in the least restrictive environment possible. So here we are with the front page, page 1 of the IEP. So the first thing I've circled here is called the IEP team meeting dates and the annual review date. So that's where you can figure out when are you going to have the next IEP meeting. And IDEA stipulates that all IEPs must be reviewed at least once every year. So when you get your initial IEP, you should see the next annual review date should be within 1 calendar year. And then I've got circled here projected in most recent evaluation date. So when your child first gets services, that's their initial evaluation date. Usually the school will, as we discussed earlier, the school will conduct assessments, or perhaps you would have hired someone outside of the school, like could be Children's National Medical Center or Kennedy Krieger or a private psychologist to evaluate your child. So either way, that would be the first evaluation date. And then every 3 years, your child should be reevaluated to determine if they continue to be eligible for special education services. And so that would be listed on this line called projected evaluation date. And that's, as I said earlier at the beginning, that's referred to as the triennial reevaluation. So once every 3 years. Primary disability. What is the eligibility code that your child is receiving services under? As I mentioned before, IDEA has 13 eligibility codes. In order for your child to be receiving services, special education services, they will have a primary disability listed here. And then the next line is, well, how does this disability impact them at school? What areas are affected by this disability? Could be reading comprehension, could be behavior, could be social skills, could be speech, could be physical disability. That should be listed here, and areas affected by the disability. And at the very bottom of page 1 is a list of the IEP team participants. So this is really important information for you to have so you can know who all the players at the table are when you go to your child's IEP meeting. They should all be listed here, everyone who's participating in an annual review. All right, the plops, if you will. The present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. I'm not sure where plops came from. I guess this present levels of performance. So this is the part of the IEP that's close to the beginning that talks about what is your student doing right now? Where is the level that they're performing at in school? Are they on grade level? If not, what grade level are they at? What can they do and what can't they do? So it should list their strengths and their needs. So this first red arrow points to this blank here after academic. This is called the area of concern. So that's, is it academic? Is it behavioral? Or in preschool, if your student is in PEP, they'll say early learning skills. So that's just the general area that, that we're looking at for this particular present level. The next line is sources. So where are we getting the information to populate this present level? How do we know how our student is functioning? Sources usually include classroom data, your input from outside reports that you might provide, formal testing. Perhaps some of your kids just finished taking their MAP M and MAP-R which they like to give 3 times a year. And then maybe there's data from a behavior intervention plan. If your child has some behaviors that are making it hard for them to learn in school, they might have a special plan to help them perform better in the classroom. So tests that are given in the classroom, that's considered curriculum-based assessments. So there's a variety of sources that can inform us as to how the student's performing in school. As I said before, the grade level performance for an academic goal. So let's say one academic area that might be in your child's IEP is, let's say, reading comprehension. So what's their grade level? What level are they reading at? That would be listed here as instructional grade level performance. For a social emotional goal, such as social skills or self-management, task completion, is the student performing at the expected level for their developmental age? Summary of findings. If this is where you put, this is the meat of the plop, where you would list out a narrative description of your child's strengths and needs at the time that the IEP team is meeting to review this data. So that's where you figure out, that's where the teacher provides a narrative description of how they're doing in class. And then does this area, in the example we're using here, let's say reading comprehension, does this area impact the student's academic achievement or functional performance? If the yes box is ticked off or the yes circle is filled in, that means that the IEP team needs to write a goal in this particular area. So if we say yes here, that means that you should see at least one reading comprehension goal later in the IEP. So as I said at the opening, the present levels drive the goals for the IEP. So it's really important that the data that is captured here in the present levels is accurate and current. That's why they do an annual review instead of letting the IEP go on without being updated. The next part of the IEP is called the special considerations section. So this is where we can consider special issues that your child might have that makes taking tests more difficult or performing in the classroom more difficult. If your child has difficulty speaking, there may be some communication accommodations listed. If they need an assistive technology, in this case, it could be they have to write everything on a Chromebook, or they need a special communication device. These sorts of things would be listed here. Behavior intervention, as I had said before, is some students have interfering behaviors, like, for example, one could be elopement, meaning when they get stressed out, they run out of the classroom. And so that behavior might be so impactful that you have to have a behavior intervention plan. What kinds of accommodations in the classroom are we going to put in place to help that student learn how to express they're being stressed out, express what's bothering them instead of running out of the classroom? So that's just one example of a behavior that might be addressed in a behavior intervention plan. And then parents probably know something about this, your testing accommodations. Lots of students who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD usually get extended time on their tests. That would be listed under testing accommodations. Perhaps a student might be easily distractible, so they would get a separate, testing in a separate room. Or another common accommodation is reduced distractions to self, reduced distractions to other. So any kind of accommodation that your student needs to be able to take tests and access the instructional environment will be listed here. And then finally, the next part, which usually takes up a bulk of a big part of the IEP, are supplementary aids, services, program modifications, and supports. So these are kinds of accommodations you might see in the classroom, such as visual schedule or preferential seating. Could be access to sensory input. Perhaps your kid needs chewing gum to stay on task. A lot of different accommodations can be listed here. The Maryland Online IEP form has a lot of common ones listed in there, but it's possible to come up with your own accommodations or work with the school team to provide things that are unique to your child, things that are going to help them be able to access the curriculum as well as their non-disabled peers. So the goals, that's the meat of the IEP. What will our child learn this year? What are we hoping they're going to accomplish, and how are they going to accomplish it? So as I had said just a few minutes ago in the present levels, if a present level if there's an indication that it is impacting the child's functional or academic performance, then there should be a goal written for that. So in our example, if we're talking about reading comprehension, this is where you would see the reading comprehension goal. So this is the goal statement, where this second red line. And the goal should state that given certain supports, so given access to a reading comprehension intervention and grade level text, and then whatever other supports your child needs to be able to access the material, the student will change their competency by acting in a certain way until they reach this desired level. So, let's see, for a reading comprehension goal, given an instructional level text, so-and-so will be able to make inferences from about characters' intentions or perspectives. That could be a reading comprehension goal, or would be able to summarize the most important details of a text, or will be able to retell a story in order, or will be able to state the author's purpose. So these are just some examples of what a reading comprehension goal could look like. For math, it could be, will be able to graph equations using the, now I've already forgotten the algebra equation, but using the standard algorithm, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where you're going to write what you want your student to accomplish. And then, oops, I have gone too far. And then, so underneath this, the goal statement, there will be, how are we going to assess that? Will it be through observational record, or will it be standardized assessments? And then you want to know what objectives they're going to need to accomplish. So how are we going to break the goal down to smaller pieces so that we can chart their progress throughout the school year? So you usually see several objectives under each goal. And what I'll talk about later in the presentation, but it will bear repeating so I can say it here as well, is every marking period, so 4 times a year, you should be receiving a copy of these goals with a progress update. So when your student's report card comes home, you should also be getting the goal pages from the IEP attached to that, or roughly delivered to you at the same time, where you can see what progress they've made on the goal for the first marking period, second marking period, et cetera. Sometimes it will be progress will be broken out by objective, depending on your school team. Like Jim has achieved objective 1, still working on objectives 2 and 3, and we haven't initiated progress on objective 4, for example. So that's one really good way of keeping track of how well your student is doing throughout the school year. Excuse me. The services part of the IEP will tell you how many hours of special education services your child will be getting and where they'll be receiving those special education services. For reading comprehension, for example, will they be getting special ed inside of general education? That is, will the general ed teacher be able to modify or provide the accommodations necessary for your child to be able to make progress in their reading comprehension goal? Or will the special ed teacher need to take the student outside of general ed for small group instruction or for a reading comprehension intervention, for example? Related services are, some examples here are speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and transportation. So if your student isn't going to their home school, transportation should be provided by MCPS, and that is considered a related service. Typically speech, some of these therapies are pull out, but they can also be push in. So by that, I mean pulling out of outside of general education, perhaps to work in a speech group or one-on-one with a speech language pathologist, or push in, where let's say an occupational therapist can come in during the written expression portion of a child's school day and help them with their writing tasks, help with some fine motor skills to improve their written output. Those are just some examples of how related services can take place either inside or outside of the classroom. So, as I said before, the least restrictive environment, the school district, MCPS, will always, their primary goal is to provide services to the student in the least restrictive environment. And as I said, that's the neighborhood school or the homeschool model. If the student's needs cannot be met in the homeschool model, so if they require more services than the special ed team at the home school can provide, they may be placed in a different program. Some programs, and this is not an exhaustive list, but some programs at the elementary diploma track level, so if your student is working towards a high school diploma, some other programs would be the Asperger program, the Gifted and Talented and Learning Disabled program, the Learning Center, and then the Social Emotional Special Education Support program. Those are for students that have some emotional disabilities. And the Learning Center is an interesting program in that it can serve both students who are diploma track as well as students who are not. So we can talk about that on the next slide. And at the secondary level, so middle and high school, I believe they still have the Learning and Academic Disabilities program, although I think MCPS is trying to do away with those. They used to exist at the elementary school level, but within the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so, all of those have been dismantled, and now all students are working at the homeschool model level, if possible. But in middle and high school, a LAD program would provide some opportunities for students to learn in self-contained classrooms for one or more subjects if necessary. So let's say your child really struggles with math. When they get to high school, they might be placed in a self-contained algebra class. So there would be more support from either co-taught with a general ed and special ed teacher, or a general ed teacher with para-educator support. So that's an option that comes up in the secondary level. The Asperger program also continues into middle and high school. And then there's an additional program called Autism Resource Services, which starts in the middle school level. And that's for students who are autistic, who are typically a year or two below grade level. And then Bridge Services does serve a lot of students with autism, but also with other challenges. Some of them, like anxiety, is often seen with a lot of students in the Bridge program. And the Bridge program allows diploma track students the opportunity to start out their school year working in self-contained classes. All of the major subjects are provided to Bridge students in self-contained classrooms, and usually the Bridge program's in its own little suite within a comprehensive school building. So for example, at Hoover Middle School or Gaithersburg Middle School, the Bridge program's kind of has its own little separate wing, but it's still within the main school. And then as students build their confidence and are motivated to go out into the bigger, the larger school setting, they can start taking their classes in the general ed setting. So that's why it's called a Bridge, right? They can make their way from self-contained over into fully included in the general ed population as their skills warrant. And there's also the Social Emotional Special Education Services program at the secondary level as well. And I do believe GTLD is also at the secondary level, if I didn't have it on that slide. So that's an overview of the diploma track programs. If your student is not going to be working towards a diploma, they will be pursuing what's called alternative learning outcomes, colloquially known as the certificate track. It's important that you know that MCPS cannot take your child off the diploma track without your consent. So the IEP team will have to review something called Appendix A with you. And this is a series of questions to determine whether your child is suitable for alternative learning outcomes. And all of the team members must agree on this. Then if the team determines, and remember, you are part of that team, if you determine that your child should be taken off the diploma track and pursue alternative learning outcomes, then you must give your written consent in order for that to happen. The school district cannot move them off the diploma track without your signature. At the elementary level, and before I move on, it's important that you know that that must be done every year. So you always have the opportunity to revisit that question if some amazing progress has happened during a school year and you go back to the annual review and you're like, hey, I think that, I think my child can receive a diploma, and you have to revisit that question every year. You must give your consent every year. So at the elementary level, some certificate track programs are, again, the Learning Center. So, and actually, I think is a mistake. Nope, Learning for Independence, that is at the elementary level, sorry. So Learning Centers, like I said before, can have students who are both on diploma track and or other students who are pursuing alternative or ALO, alternative learning outcomes. The Learning for Independence program, the Classic Autism program, and the School Community-Based program and the Extensions program are all elementary level programs that for kids who are pursuing ALO. Secondary track, same thing, LFI, Classic Autism, SCB, and Extensions. Again, there are some special schools that I haven't put in here. These are all programs that are offered in a comprehensive school environment. So, what you would consider a regular elementary, middle, or high school. So I'm not going to go into some of those other specialized offerings in this slide presentation. So those are the programs that are offered by Montgomery County Public Schools. But what if none of these programs are right for your child? What if MCPS can't meet your child's needs in any of these programs? Then the IEP team makes a referral to a central IEP meeting, or CIEP. At the central meeting, so what will happen is at the end of the IEP meeting, when the team has decided or determined that they can't meet your child's needs in any of the programs in MCPS, the team will prepare your child's file and send it a referral package to central, as they call it. So the package will go, the referral will go to the central IEP team for review. They will read through everything in your child's file. And when I say read through it all, they will read it all. They're really thorough. So they will review your child's file and then call you in for an IEP meeting, but at the central level. So you will sit and review that material with the central IEP team, as well as representatives from your child's referring program. And then you will determine which non-public schools might be able to meet your child's needs. And the CIEP team will decide where to send a referral. So this is, a private placement made by MCPS. And then they send out the referrals, and schools will either accept or deny your child's application. And then if they are accepted at one of these schools, then MCPS will pay for the tuition to go there. But there's a very limited number of schools that MCPS can make referrals to. So that's all about the IEP. When you've got the IEP, this is what happens with it throughout the school year. It happens at the meetings. But the most important part of the IEP is implementing it, right? The IEP should be implemented immediately after you have that IEP meeting. The next school day, the IEP should be implemented after you've given written consent for the first one, or after you've had another IEP meeting after any other annual review. And then progress monitoring is something that parents and guardians should be very, on top of and actively involved in. As I mentioned when we went over the goals, you should be getting a quarterly progress report when you get your student's report card. Again, the progress report should provide you with information about what kind of progress the student has made on any particular goal or objectives that fall underneath that goal. If any of those say, and then we'll also say making sufficient progress to meet the goal within the IEP year, or not making sufficient progress. And if the student is not making sufficient progress, then the team should call a periodic review to change the goals and come up with or provide more supports that are going to help make that goal more attainable. Another thing, if you're having questions or doubts about the progress your child's making at school, you can ask for work samples to be sent home. Like, could you please send me some of the writing samples, some of the essays that they've been working on in class? Because I'd really like to see how the written expression goal is moving along, for example. And another way parents can get more insight into what's happening during the school day or school year is by requesting that homeschool communication be added as a supplementary service to the child's IEP. During the IEP meeting, when you ask for this to be added to the IEP team will probably want to know what kind of information you want them to send home and how frequently. So make sure that your request is reasonable. I mean, everyday updates on, math progress is probably not going to be a realistic expectation, but maybe a weekly behavior note on how their behavior plan's going on a weekly or monthly basis might be something that would be more reasonable. It all depends on your child's needs. And then, as I said before, the IEP team must meet at least every year to assess student progress. Ideally, you would love to see that the child has achieved all of the goals in the IEP, and then the next IEP year, you're going to write all new goals in areas where the student still has continuing needs. Probably not going to achieve all the goals, but that's the dream. So every year you should be meeting to discuss present levels of performance and how those drive the goals for the next year. Again, you got to make sure that those present levels have been updated at the annual review. You don't want old data from the previous year because that's not going to tell you what they're doing now. And goals should not simply be carried over from one year to the next, because your child should be accomplishing those goals or accomplishing parts of the goals, some of the objectives under each goal. So if the goal remains the same one year from the next, then that tells you something's not going correctly. That means they're not maybe using the right teaching methodology for your child, or maybe that particular program can't provide the services that your child needs in order to meet those goals. So those are some things to look for. And then I talked earlier about the triennial reevaluation. IDEA stipulates that every 3 years, the team must meet. They must conduct some assessments to determine whether the child still has continuing eligibility for special education services. That will happen at a reevaluation planning meeting where the IEP team will agree which, if any, assessments need to be performed. So it is possible that your team will meet for a reevaluation planning meeting and everybody on the team, including the parents or the guardians, agree, yep, we're still seeing the same disability. It's still, impacting our student in school. I don't think anything has substantially changed over the last 3 years. So, the team can agree at that meeting that the student continues to be eligible for special education services and move on without doing any further assessments. However, you may have questions about maybe you're seeing something new. Maybe your child's now having more difficulty with attention, let's say, and you think that they might need to be assessed for ADHD, or maybe they're, anything could come up within a 3-time-year period. And so maybe a new assessment in a specific area, or a complete reassessment, including cognitive and achievement testing, needs to be done. So that is a decision that the school-based team and parents and guardians need to make every 3 years. If it is determined that assessments do need to be performed, MCPS will conduct those relative assessments, whatever is necessary for moving forward. You will have to give written consent again for MCPS to assess your child. And once you have given your written consent, those assessments must be completed within 60 days after the planning meeting. You may opt to have private testing done at your own expense. So if you don't want to have MCPS test your child, let's say you would like to go with an outside provider, you may do that. It would behoove you to tell MCPS that you're doing that so that they don't run the same tests as an outside provider would be doing. And the rule is that MCPS must consider the results of your private testing, but they are not required to adopt the recommendations of an outside evaluator. Generally, if it's a reputable outside evaluator, MCPS will adopt some, if not all of those recommendations, but they're not required to. So if you end up having MCPS do the assessments and you disagree with the outcome of those assessments, then you may request an independent educational evaluation or an IEE, which amounts to MCPS paying for a private assessment, but you can only do that if MCPS has failed to conduct their assessments properly, or if they come up with some results that just seem wildly out of keeping with what you know of your own child. So you cannot get an IEE until MCPS has done their own assessments and you have found them to be, lacking. You disagree with those outcomes. So how can you be an effective participant in the IEP process? Every year, when it's time for the annual review, you are usually sent with the 5-day notice, which we'll talk about in a second, a blank form called the parent report. If you don't get it, if it doesn't come home in an email to you, the link for it is right here on the slide. And we can make this available. I'm sure the slides will be available. I know Stephanie's recording this. So you can find this form online at the Montgomery County Schools website. And the form has about 6 questions. You talk about your child's strengths, what you noticed about their learning behaviors, what you would like to see as their goal for the next school year, how you think the school can help them reach that goal. It's a good idea to fill out the parent report. That feedback that you provide to the school should be captured in the IEP. There is a place for parental input, and typically the school district or the school team will copy your parent report into the IEP. Not all school districts provide parents with the opportunity to submit this parent report, so I think this is one of the nicer features of MCPS. Doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be, super detailed, but if there are specific things that you really want the IEP team to focus on, this is your opportunity to let them know. Of course, you should know what your child's IEP says. That's why we're having this meeting, so that when you read the IEP, oh, now I have now you have some context for what all of these like education talk or all this lingo means. Now you have a better sense of what you're looking at. And it's important that you know that MCPS must provide you with any documents, including a draft IEP, that are going to be discussed at the IEP meeting at least 5 days before the meeting. We call this the 5-day rule. This is going to give you, should give you enough time to review, prepare any questions you might have for discussion at the IEP meeting. So thoroughly read these documents prior to going to the meeting and have your questions ready. You might even be able to ask them beforehand so they can come to the meeting with answers for you. It's important during the school year to maintain data about your child's progress. If there are just, it's good to keep emails. If you have any relevant emails that talk about progress your child's making in an academic area or behaviorally, you should keep that data. You should maybe make a separate file in your email inbox, in your email client, or you can print it out, whatever. I know that MCPS does not, at least in the past, the email servers did not keep email past, I don't know, 30 days or 60 days or something. So it may be the case that your email or your text message that you've saved is the only existing record of that communication that you might have had with the school district. So it's important to save relevant data. It's also important to save relevant work samples. So like we talked about before, how do we know whether the child is writing at grade level? Well, one way is to get your hands on some writing samples, and how does this, what are the guidelines for fifth grade narrative essay? Does this look like it's meeting those benchmarks? Same thing with math, social studies, anything that's going to be relevant for where your child's at. And if you have any outside reports or evaluations done, let's say you take your child for a neuropsych or a private speech evaluation, you should present those reports and evaluations to the IEP team for their consideration. So these are some ways that you can provide input into the IEP process for your child. Well, what do you do when you disagree with the school team? Maybe you've done all these things and you've done a really good job of monitoring the progress, and yet you still can't come to an agreement with the school-based team. If something's going wrong in between annual reviews, you can call a periodic review. So if you get one of those progress reports sent home and it says not making sufficient progress, you can call a meeting to discuss that with the IEP team. If there's something else that's going on that you keep getting emails from a specific teacher saying, this, that, and the other thing are happening during class time, you might want to call a meeting to review that and see if there are other supports that can be put into place to solve whatever particular problem has come up. Another way that parents can make note of their disagreement is in a document called the prior written notice. This is something that you should receive within 5 days after any IEP meeting. And that seems kind of counterintuitive that you would receive prior written notice after a meeting, but it means you are being notified prior to the school district taking any action. So that being said, if you have a meeting and the school proposes that they want to do something or provide a specific service or take away a specific service from your child, that proposal should be recorded in the prior written notice, or the PWN. Anything that you propose that you would like to see the IEP team do, and whether they agree to it or they don't. Any requests that are either agreed to or denied should be recorded in the prior written notice. So if you don't think that this particular program is serving your child well and you would like to have them move to a different program, and you provide all of your reasons and still the IEP team says, no, we think we can serve your child's needs here, make sure you ask them to put down your request and its denial in the prior written notice. So this is a permanent record of the things that you and the school agreed to or disagreed on in any IEP meeting. So if you still can't reach an agreement, the next step would be to go to mediation. You can request mediation by contacting the MCPS Resolution and Compliance Office. And when you file the mediation request, it invokes something called the stay put rule, which means your child will stay put in their current educational setting until mediation is completed. Mediation is usually done at the central office on Hungerford Road, and it's this, you meet and the school team meets, and there's a mediator there to try to help you come to a resolution over whatever issue you're in disagreement about. Another avenue to take is due process, and this is sort of, I guess, like you might want to call it the nuclear option. Due process is basically suing the school district. So due process hearings are presided over by an administrative law judge who's appointed by the Maryland Office of Administrative Hearings. The administrative law judge runs the hearing and makes the decisions. You should hire an attorney if you're going to due process. You're not required to, but it would probably be in your best interest. Something to know about due process hearings in Maryland, in the state of Maryland. the party who is bringing the due process claim. So if you are filing for due process against the school district, for example, you're bringing the due process claim against the school district. You, as the claimant, has the burden of proving your case. So it is usually more challenging for parents to prove their case than it is for the school district. They have access to more files, all of the student records, which you may or may not have access to. I mean, you can request your students' files. That is your right under FERPA, the Federal Education Records Privacy Act. I'm sure I'm going to get that wrong, but FERPA accords you the right to have access to your students' confidential school files and educational records. But it is difficult for students to prevail, or for parents, excuse me, to prevail in a due process hearing. So that's needs to be taken seriously if you're going to go that route. So I think that is the basics of what I intended to cover this evening. There are some more resources listed here for you to consult in your free time. This roadmap that they kind of fleshed out in these slides, you can find at the XMinds website. XMinds is primarily focused on autism advocacy, but the these IEP resources and the navigating special ed would apply to students with any disability. So that would apply to anybody, regardless of if it's dyslexia or a physical disability. It's a very general roadmap. Then the Department of Special Education has its own, MCPS's special ed department has their own parent resources, which you can find at this URL listed here. And then I'm sure you've gotten a copy of this at every IEP meeting you've ever been to. The Parental Rights Maryland Procedural Safeguards Notice. They do update it from time to time. So if you have an outdated copy, you might want to take the one at the next meeting. I think that's all I was going to cover this evening. This is how you can reach me if you have additional questions, or of course you can always send me questions through Stephanie. I'm at martinez@martinezadvocacy.com. And I guess we will turn it over to Stephanie for questions.
Monica, that was so helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. That was
really, really informative, and you really covered a tremendous amount in a very short time. So
never was I too fast.
Guess I'm gonna drink of water. Thank you very much. Really, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the committee, because this information is really helpful. And I know parents have a lot of questions. There's a lot of, you gave a really great overview, and parents have some questions. So I'm going to go through the chat. I'm not sure where I should start. The bottom. Maybe I'll start from the bottom and go up. Okay.
Steph, can I just say hi really quick?
Oh, sure. Yes, please. Hi, Rachel. Rachel got on late. We reached our max of 100 participants. I'm very excited that so many people showed up, but I'm very sorry that people didn't get in. So anyway, this is Rachel. This is our committee co-chair. So want to say something?
Hi guys, I just wanted to take a minute to introduce myself really quickly. I am Rachel Watanabe Tate. I am Steph's co-chair. Some of you might know me from the past 3 years. I was the chair and have stepped down now to the chair. Monica, thank you so much for presenting. I absolutely appreciate it so much. Those of you that know me in my prior life, I also know Monica from XMinds because I serve on their BIPOC committee. And I've done this now. I've been on the MCCPTA chair for the special ed committee for 3 years, and now Steph is the chair, which is absolutely awesome. I have a little girl named Lulu who is in a special ed preschool program. She is 4 years old, and prior to prior to going to virtual learning, I was an autism specialist for MCPS as well. And now I am a resigned autism specialist from MCPS as well. So I'm very familiar with the system. I just wanted to say thank you everyone for joining, and that we are in this together. And Steph and I are really proud to have all of you guys here. And if there's any way we can support you, please reach out to us and let us know. And thank you again. And Monica, thank you for the presentation. And I will now turn my cameras off and let you guys answer the questions.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Rachel's amazing. Everyone who I talk to, I say, oh, do you know Rachel Tate? Oh, yes, I know Rachel. Rachel's amazing. Everyone agrees. So thank you, Rachel. Okay, so I'm just gonna start at the bottom and go up, and we'll see what we have, how well we have time. We were kind of scheduled for 9:15 to end, and you'll just, if you want to end at 9:15, we'll see how it goes. Okay, all right. But if you're ready to stop, please let me know. Okay, how do we know accommodations are being implemented in class?
That's a good question. I know that what I do, for lots of my clients, is that I actually go into classes and observe. And when I go in, I will take, I will have the IEP. So I will be trying to observe whether those accommodations are being implemented. But now that you've said that from a parent's perspective, I'm wondering how we could do that. I mean, I would ask for them to send, like, if, for example, let's say your child has a visual schedule accommodation or a token board or something, I would ask for a copy. I would ask them to either send you a picture or, your own personal copy that you could have at home. But I would ask the team to provide you with some evidence of how those accommodations are being implemented. And that's a topic for discussion at any IEP meeting.
Yeah, good answer. Okay. Someone's asking about compensatory services. Not sure if you want to get into that.
I will refer you to, I think, didn't you guys do this last year? There was what's her name, Nicole?
Yeah, Nicole Joseph is an education attorney, and she came and spoke to our committee about that. So we have a new Facebook page, and if you look in the chat, I posted all about it. So we're getting a YouTube channel set up, and this will be on our YouTube channel. So I will try to put that also with that. And it's a full hour presentation about compensatory services. So good question, but I don't cover that, right?
Also, if you want to, you can just email me to remind me, the person who put that in the chat. I know Kimberly Glassman, who you will be having speaking in January, just did a presentation on that for X-Minds in September. So I can just send you the YouTube link for that as well.
That's
if you just email me offline.
We had a very interesting comment from Rebecca Kay that said, at what point in the school year should we expect a teacher to be up to speed on our students' IEP? We signed our kindergartner's IEP on the last day of school in June, so I thought it would allow him to hit the ground running this year in first grade. I spoke to his teacher on Friday, and she hasn't even seen his IEP yet. I was very surprised and discouraged. I'm new to this process, and this is something we hear from Steph and I have gone through ourselves. So what is your timeline for that?
They should have read it before going to school in the beginning of the school year.
That was my answer too.
I hear this a lot too, like at the beginning of the school year. Oh, well, we're not going to start implementing the IEP until like the middle of September. No, you're supposed to implement the IEP the next day. I know some of these things might take, if you've got extensive visuals or stuff that's on the accommodations, it might take a couple of days to get those like printed and implemented and put into place, but you are supposed to implement the IEP right away. And the teachers should know about all of the goals and all of the supports that are in there for your child.
Another question was asked, does MCPS allow parents to bring in and pay an outside specialist and tutor to supplement services, such as an Orton Gillingham tutor, particularly if they're unable to provide these services in MCPS, or unable to relieve these services at what they believe is an appropriate level?
Right. No. You have to, whatever special education the school district agrees to provide to you is that's the kind of, again, the contract between you and the school district. But I believe there should be trained Orton Gillingham staff in every school now. MCPS went through a big push bringing in Orton Gillingham training to people in general education teachers and special education teachers. I know that's just one example. It is also possible for parents to provide, like if you have an outside provider that's working, like tutoring your child outside of school, you can ask for that provider to be, you can invite that provider to come to the student's IEP meeting, or you can also provide some of the reports that they may have written or some of the feedback from their tutoring sessions to the IEP team for their consideration. But if they can't provide the services that your child requires, then that's when you need to consider, well, is this the right program for my kid, or maybe take it up to the next level. That sounds like something that you would definitely need to discuss at the meeting and work out what the details are there.
Okay.
But no, you can't bring private providers in.
Okay, thank you. Kelly asked, does MCPS have a therapy for children that have social emotional disabilities, anxiety, and mood disorders?
Yeah, that is something you can ask to be put on, like counseling services is a related service that can be put on your child's IEP. There are special programs for students that have significant anxiety, like the SES, it's a real mouthful. It used to be called Emotional Disabilities Program, and they changed that to the Social Emotional Special Education Services. So it depends on the nature of your child's needs. Also, there are special social emotional curricula that are used in certain programs, such as the Asperger program. But that is, yes, there are some therapeutic components that can be addressed in the IEP if they need, it depends on the needs of your child, but it is possible depending on, again, I don't know the specifics of you.
Okay. Marshall asked, how can a language disorder be discovered when the student speaks of different language at home? My son is in 4th grade and has been in full-time English program since age 1. He seems to be more fluent in our home language than English. His special ed teacher thinks his English difficulty is due to being an ESOL student. ESOL thinks he should qualify for special ed. The result is that he qualifies for neither. The school disagreed with outside evaluation for expressive language disorder.
It is possible to have a bilingual speech evaluation. I know of some students who have had that, where you have either you can have an assessor who speaks the home language in doing some interpretation, or perhaps a bilingual speech language pathologist, but it is possible to have that done. I even believe that was through MCPS. I'm thinking of a specific case where one of the outcomes of the speech language evaluation was to determine whether the child had a language dominance. And in this particular case, it was proven that the child was equally fluent in both languages and had the same kind of speech language difficulties in both languages. So it is possible for that to be sussed out if you specifically request interpretation services or a bilingual evaluator.
Okay, thank you. Laura Mitchell says, Laura, I want to shout out to you. Just thank you for posting and sharing all of our links. Much appreciation to you. Laura says, what are your suggestions when an IEP specifies co-taught classes, but the student was quote unquote lost in the middle school to high school, received no case manager and only one co-taught class? They offered to change the student to those supported classes. However, that means completely upending the student's schedule, and it's not ideal for an overwhelmed autistic student.
Right. That's difficult to address once it's already underway, but that's the kind of thing where you would need to have an IEP meeting and determine whether the school did not meet its requirements there. That might be a case where you want to bring in an advocate to look at whether services were denied and then your child's FAPE was denied. might be grounds for mediation. But again, I don't know without looking at the particulars of the case.
Yeah, we just had an IEP and we made no progress because they don't have a solution other than upending the schedule.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is rough. That is really rough.
Laura, do you have my email?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Email me. Off base. We'll talk about your grandson. Okay. Did we answer the PEP question? It says, what are the advantages of hiring an education consultant to help parents prep for an IEP? Did you answer that?
Nope. It depends on, how, I guess, I don't want to that's kind of like I'm speaking against my own self-interest, but there are some things in an IEP that you might not have considered, again, like this present levels of performance. An advocate can really look and dig down and deep in there to see if they're adequately capturing the child's strengths and challenges. Also, determining whether the goals are sufficiently written to reflect their needs, to address the needs that are reflected in the present levels. It also depends on whether you've had any recent evaluations done. I find that in a lot of cases, when parents have had outside evaluations performed and then they submit that report to the school reads the report and says, oh, yes, we agree with these, the findings in this report. And then they draft up a new IEP, but haven't incorporated any of the data from the outside report. And that is something that an advocate would definitely be on top of and make sure that whatever outside data you're bringing in is going to inform the new IEP. What recommendations, what have we learned about through this testing, and how can we change some of the supports in the special, the supplementary aids and services, or what new insights do we have about how to write the goals to really drill down on those specific challenging areas for your student.
I definitely agree with you as someone who also does some advocacy work in public schools. I would just say a really important thing, just having your mute, please, is that you might want, you can have your voice heard. You know how you were saying that you could be you should be a full participant in your child's meeting, and an advocate can help make sure your voice is heard at the table, because sometimes it can be a scary place, around the IEP table. So.
Hey guys, if everyone could go ahead and mute themselves, we would really appreciate that. The person using the login name under Zoom user, if you could go ahead and mute yourself.
Okay, you're the host, so if you would be the, I'm sorry to put that on you, but I can't.
No, I got it.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I see that someone has asked a question about transferring from out of state. So when you come in from out of state, you should, as soon as you enroll your child in the neighborhood school, the school principal should be calling an IEP meeting to review the IEP that you're bringing in with you. And then the schools, the onus is on the school district to provide you with comparable services to what you had received in the previous state that you're coming in from. So if you haven't had that meeting, I would request one right away. And so you can get the same level of service that you had been previously receiving. And if the home school and like the neighborhood school that your students enrolled in can't provide that level of services, then the team will try to find a different placement. Sorry, I just see what's on the column here.
That's great.
The next one says, do you have any advice for obtaining an IEP for a teen like mine who was recently diagnosed with ASD but is being homeschooled now? It appears I must submit a complete IEP package with all the supporting docs to central office.
Yeah, if you have, there is special office, like the private and parochial. Well, that's if you're coming in from private and parochial schools, but there is a process where you will need to submit any testing that you've had done that documents the student's diagnosis, and then that you would like to receive special education services through MCPS. they will take a look at whatever documentation you have and then determine if additional assessments need to be done if you're going to be enrolling them in like the neighborhood school. So you would kind of start at the same initial IEP meeting back at the beginning. Has that been your experience, Rachel?
Yes, that has been my experience. And I think that also goes back to John's question, who says, if you have a child that has come from overseas and they have a special learning report, but not an IEP, must you go through the IEP process from the very start? And yes, that's along the same questions of the same lines.
Yeah.
The next question is from, and please correct me if I'm saying this wrong, you can unmute yourself. It is Iron, and it says, if your child has both dyslexia and ADHD and the team codes your IEP as other health related over SLD, does that pose a disadvantage to your child in the long run? In other words, I get the feeling that teams would prefer coding other health, I think he means
impairment,
OHR, with the hopes of parents medicating their children and then roll them off the IEP. It also gives the teams the license to not focus on the dyslexia, which MCPS is still struggling to provide appropriate interventions.
That's a good point. I believe it's not, the school district cannot recommend that your child receive medication. Isn't that illegal?
Yes.
No. So that is something the school district cannot legally do. I think, in giving the school district the benefit of the doubt, OHI, I think when you're looking at the primary disability, the goal is to figure out which disability is driving which one has the most impact on their performance in school. So if it is the ADHD, that the distractibility or the challenges in executive functioning that's making everything else more challenging, that's one reason why they might pick OHI over SLD, because it does have a more global impact, whereas the specific learning disability would probably only be affecting one area of academics. The ADHD or OHI would likely be impacting multiple aspects of the child's educational performance. So that's another reason why they might be picking OHI. However, there are some new procedures, and I'd have to go back and read up on this because I don't remember which ones qualify, but it is possible to have the child coded as multiple disabilities. There are some specific rules as to how that works. Again, I haven't done that in a couple of years, so I'd have to go back and look at that. So that might be a possibility. So, but in general, it's whichever disability has the most global impact or impacts the student the most during their school experience.
Amy asked, our school will not meet in person for IEP meetings, but I feel like this is important. Is this across all MCPS? Amy, I can only speak for myself, but like I've met for a periodic with my daughter's team and like another meeting for her, and they've all been virtual. That's just my experience personally.
I will say that it is variable. Most of the IEP meetings that I've gone to are virtual. I have gone to one in person 2 weeks ago, and then I have an IEP meeting tomorrow that I need to go to. The parent just said, oh, and by the way, it's in person. I was like, what? So I have an in-person IEP meeting tomorrow. So I would say that's like 20% in person, 80% virtual. I think I've heard some folks complain that they feel like the parents feel like they're at an unfair disadvantage if the school team is all together in one place, co-located, and the parents are not, and during a virtual meeting. But I don't know how many IEP meetings you might have been to, but these conference rooms do tend to be incredibly small. So there's also something to be said for not being crammed in this like little conference room with all these people. I mean, they'll all be wearing masks, but I don't know. It's a toss up, but yes, it is not across the board one way or the other right now. That's
very true. Kelly asked, is the behavior intervention plan listed on the IEP or is it a separate form? It is listed on my son's IEP. that he requires one, but I don't see it on the actual plan?
All right, that's a great question. That is actually how I got started in advocacy, because I was having an argument with my son's kindergarten program over his BIP. His preschool teacher had written a BIP and it wasn't being implemented. So yes, on the IEP, there is a section. I go back to my slides, but there's a section that says, does this child require a behavior intervention plan? There should be a place on the IEP where it will list the date that the FBA, that's the functional behavior assessment, was taken. And that's all the data the team uses to determine what behavior interventions need to be put in place. So there should be a date for the FBA and a date that the BIP, that the BIP was put into play, implemented. However, the behavior intervention plan should be in a separate document. And that document is another MCPS form that lists what are the target behaviors, when do you usually, when are these behaviors most likely to occur? When are they least likely to occur? What usually, and it kind of goes through a whole detail of what should you do to prevent, what new things need to be put in the classroom to prevent this behavior from happening. And then what behaviors do we want to teach the child to do to replace the behaviors we're trying to extinguish. And then finally, what happens when something goes wrong? What if the child still engages in this behavior? How should the school team respond to those behaviors? So the behavior intervention plan is a separate document, but it should always be checked off, yes, and with the date of implementation in the IEP. If you don't have that plan, you should ask the school to send it to you.
And then another question was asked, is there any way in which OHI disadvantages when you are arguing for your child? Or can they provide any services for OHI? I'm assuming she means as a diagnosis. And Amy, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and clarify your question. If I said that incorrectly, that's up to you.
That's fine. My kid is a brain cancer survivor who also has hearing impairment from his chemo. And I tried to argue that due to the brain surgery and brain radiation, it should be a TBI diagnosis as the primary. And they argued that he was OHI because it was really his hearing loss and his lack of stamina due to what he'd been through. And I mean, in the end, they gave me all the services I wanted. So at the end, I don't really care, but I was just wondering if there's any reason to prefer one diagnosis over another when you're doing an IEP.
Well, and this, and maybe some other cases there might be for, like in the case of, the bottom line is that as long as the student is getting the services that he or she needs, that is the most important piece. And coding should not drive services, needs should drive services. So that is really the fundamental piece of free and appropriate public education, is that the students' academic needs or functional behavioral needs or what have you should drive services and goals. In practice, sometimes a certain coding and eligibility coding could kind of send you down one trajectory or another. This can happen with autism versus emotional disability. There's kind of a branching of the ways in terms of programs that a student could be put into. But the fundamental piece is that needs drive services. Placements are not, everything's supposed to be driven by the student's needs.
Thank you, Monica. I think we're almost at 9:30. Do you want to take like maybe one more question?
Right.
And
One more question.
Okay, great. There was a GTLD question. That's my favorite question. I work with a lot of Chewy kids, and so I lost that question now. It's about someone was asking about like if your child needs to fail or in order to get in the GTLD program, and if there were like different here it is. Does a GTLD designation requires the student to have failing grades in order to qualify?
No, they do not. That I think isn't there like a specific discrepancy between some sets of skills, like a 25% discrepancy between certain cognitive level and then what they're being able to do in certain subject matter areas. The student needs to have a gifted and talented intellectual ability, cognitive abilities in those areas, but also at the same time have learning disabilities, which needs special accommodations and services in order for them to access the curriculum. It does not have any specific grade. They don't have to be passing or failing or anything like that. It's more about their specific profile, their cognitive and learning skills profile.
Right.
Do you have anything to add, Stephanie? Since you
no,
were
no, that's great.
Yeah,
no,
you're more of a specialist in that area.
Someone also asked if earlier on I saw they were entering the GTLD program if in MCPS if it's only at one level or like elementary, middle, high school.
No, I believe they're at all levels.
Yeah, it's on all. They're different in how they, like the elementary is like a self-contained class more or less, and then the middle and high school is they have a resource class together, or they provide co-taught, like a para in their higher level classes. So,
right.
Yeah. So I think thank you. I think we're in the, I know we've been past, we're supposed to end at 9:15. So yeah, is there anything else, Rachel, that you thought was important to address?
The only thing that I would say is that do we know if parents are from another country, is there a specific resource from the intake office? I know for special education, I know we have an international office, but do we know how that correlates to the special education office? Like, do we have a specific resource, or should it possibly be the guidance counselor is the first person I'm thinking of that should have been their main go-to for that person?
Yeah, or the school principal.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. But no, there isn't in special ed. There isn't a international liaison.
Okay.
Rachel, could I ask a question? It's Laura Mitchell. On that point, they had 2 people processing all of the international applications.
Right.
And so they were telling students that they were in families that they were a 6 to 8 month backup at one point. So if those students are special education coming from, like one particular family had been here, moved to Canada for 2 years and then came back because it had been 2 years, they had to wait in line, but they had a special needs child. What does that do? What kind of violations does that raise?
Yeah, I feel like that's something that one would want to bring in an attorney. I mean, that seems like a procedural violation, and it would result in violation of FAPE.
You know what, Laura, I think we can ask the attorney that did the other special ed talks for us what that would look like, and get back to you via email for that. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. It just prompted it for me.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And we've had, like a couple people on here that is a very great question, especially with, all the kids that we're now servicing from, all the world things that are happening. So we need to do right by everybody. Yeah. That's what we're here for. So thank you for bringing that up. We appreciate that, and we appreciate you.
Well, I'm going to let Monica go, and I'll because it gets late. It's it's after 9:30, and we really appreciate you, Monica, for such a great presentation and answering all these questions on the fly. So thank you so much. You're a wealth of knowledge, and if you have any further questions, I mean, Rachel and I are happy to answer, PTA, like committee, MCCPTA special education as our chair roles. But if you have any more individualized needs that you need special help with, please reach out to Monica. And Monica at some point put it in the chat. I'm going to save the chat. But we want to repeat one more time your email is Martinez.
I'm typing it into the chat.
Yeah.
I'm making sure I'm spelling it correctly, because wouldn't that be embarrassing?
So So please reach out to Monica if you have any need individualized help, because she this is what she does all day, every day. So so she'd be a great resource if you need any personalized help with your child. So thank you so much for all the amazing questions. They're spot on. And so as I put in the chat before, we have a new Facebook page, and I hope you'll join. And if you want to volunteer for our committee to be a special ed rep, we would love that. We have our first meeting happening on October 20th at 8 p.m. So if you would like to volunteer for that, please reach out to us. To special ed at, I'll put our emails. I did it a couple times, but I'm going to do it one more time in the chat here. A lot of good stuff in the chat. We look forward to our next speakers. As I mentioned, we have Brian Gruber and Kimberly Glassman and their team. They're special ed attorneys, and they can answer even, from what Monica gave a super amazing, overview of everything, and they're going to go, a little further as from their perspective as attorneys. So again, thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you, Monica, again. And we look forward to seeing you all again.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
Sure. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.